Vamos, ¿sí se escucha? Sí. Vamos a comenzar con esta importante mesa. Lleva como título La lucha por la unión internacional de las clases trabajadoras. En el título mismo está este relieve. Y tenemos a Jonathan House, uno de los participantes, a Oscar Alzaga, a Sean Smith, a Humberto da Silva, bueno, parece que Humberto da Silva no viene, Jaime Osorio, Marco Gómez y Juan José Rojas, considerando que algunos compañeros no van a estar en la mesa y considerando también el relieve que tiene esta discusión que se plantea en este eje, cada participante va a tener 20 minutos. Al final del conjunto de exposiciones, por supuesto que abriríamos una ronda para comentarios, para preguntas, para que los propios participantes puedan hacer alguna otra anotación que consideren significativa. Entonces, pues vamos a tratar de ceñirnos ese tiempo para poder también acabar a tiempo y continuar con otra de las actividades que son las conclusiones y el propio convivio, ¿no? Entonces tendríamos, repito, 20 minutos por cada participación y comienza en su participación Jonathan House.
Can everyone hear me? Test?
No.
It's okay?
No está funcionando. Pásame.
Hola.
Eso sí.
Sí.
Test? Can everyone hear that?
We can't hear you.
No?
Yes.
Test?
No.
No?
Sobre todo los traductores. ¿Oye?
Hola.
No.
Los traductores están apagados.
Sí, están ahí atrás.
¿Están apagados? ¿Oyen?
Hola.
Oh, they heard that one.
Hola.
How about now? Yes? Okay. So I guess first off, my name's Jonathan House. I'm with the Industrial Workers of the World. I just want to say thank you for having me in Mexico. It's great to be here. I love being in your beautiful country. So I'll get started on my presentation. Like I said, I'm with the Industrial Workers of the World. So in my presentation, I just want to touch on, I guess, three things. I want to talk a little bit about my union. I also want to talk about solidarity unionism, which is an organizing model that we've been experimenting with for about the last 15 years, I'd say. So it's relatively new. And then lastly, I'd like to touch on the organizing that's going on in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, where I'm from. So that's sort of what my presentation is going to look like. I probably won't take the whole 20 minutes because I'm interested in having a bit of a dialogue if we can with people. So hopefully we can leave a bit more time for the Q&A session. So my union, the IWW, has been around for quite a long time. It was founded in 1905 and was very active in the United States mostly in the early 20th century, I guess. And it sort of declined through the post-war period, but we've experienced a bit of a resurgence since about the 1990s with our model of solidarity union organizing. And I guess one of the things that's been talked about at this conference is some of the limitations around trade unions, and that's also something that we experience in Canada and something that my union is struggling with to sort of overcome, because the traditional or mainstream unions in Canada very much are engaged with the state and government and aren't able to do maybe a lot of the Is that better? was saying, I think our model of solidarity unionism might be something that we can talk about as a way around some of the limitations of mainstream trade unionism. The IWW is very different than most unions, I would say. It's explicitly anti-capitalist. We do not use dues checkoff is what we call it. So when dues payments comes out of your paycheck, we don't do that because we believe that's not democratic for people to be able to choose to be in the organization or not. We have a very democratic structure and minimal staff in trying to keep the bureaucratic part of the organization to a minimum. So that's sort of the IWW, and we're not affiliated with the Canadian Labour Council like most unions in Canada. So that's sort of the context that I'm talking in. So solidarity unionism is a term that comes from mostly Staunton Lind, who's a labor historian in the United States, and he wrote a book in 1992 entitled Solidarity Unionism, and that's where IWW gets a lot of inspiration from. So Staunton Lind's summary of solidarity unionism is that workers should look primarily to each other to accomplish their goals rather than depending on laws, government agencies, or distant union bureaucracies. So that's basically what we're trying to do. And what that means is in our organizing, we do not engage in the sort of sanctioned state industrial relations framework. Instead, we practice a kind of unionism that's maybe more common to like unionism in the 1910s or 20s or something like that. We believe that any group of workers coming together to improve their conditions at work are a union. We don't need the government or the employer to tell us that. We know that. And so that gives us a lot of advantages in particular industries, and there are certain drawbacks, but we believe that it's worth it in the long run to sort of foster the kind of labor movement that we want to see, and that understands that capitalism, there's no way for a fair capitalism or more horizontal capitalism to exist. We understand that the ultimate goal is to create a new society not based on those principles. So we think solidarity unionism is one of the best ways for our organization, at least, to do that. So I guess that's a little bit about solidarity unionism. And I think to illustrate that, I'll talk a bit about what we're actually doing in Toronto and how we're trying to put that into practice. In Canada, generally unions would seek certification through the Labour Board and get an election where the Labour Board would hold an election where it would be supervised and to see if there's a majority of workers that want the union or not, and then it gets certified as a bargaining agent, or as a bargaining unit, sorry. But we're not going through that process in Toronto. What we're working on right now is the Toronto Harm Reduction Workers Union is sort of our biggest campaign at the moment. So that's a group of workers that work in the healthcare industry, and they're mostly associated with community health clinics. There's about 12 of them in Toronto, and they provide a number of services. But there's sort of the funding model for healthcare is sort of complicated, but the government, in this context, hands over money to sort of an arm's length organization called a LIN, and then they provide it to sort of the 12 community health clinics and other healthcare organizations. So community health clinics have a mandate to provide services to particular communities that they're based in, and often they're lower income areas. So a part of their work are unionizing right now. These workers are often people with lived experience of drug use, so they've been sort of systematically excluded from many of the mainstream unions in Canada. If there are unions in the workplace, they're not within that union. So we're targeting them right now. In Toronto, that's our biggest drive. It's likely to go public next week, is when we're hopefully going to launch that and make it public to the employer. Trying to think what else I should talk about for the election. I mean, I can't talk too much about it right now since it's not public, but also since we've only gone through like the very initial stage of sort of a solidarity unionism approach. Like it's all secret so far, the employer is unaware of it, and so it's sort of once that we make that public next week that there's really going to be some lessons to come out of how we engage with the employer outside of the traditional legal framework. But something I will talk a little bit about, and then I think Sean is going to talk more about, is our work with Porter Airlines, which is a smaller airline in Canada that operates mostly out of the Billy Bishop Airport. We have two airports in Toronto. It's sort of the smaller downtown one. And there was a group of refuelers at that airport that decided to unionize and actually went on strike for recognition with the employer there. And they're a very small group of workers, so the employer said, sort of, to hell with you, we can get replacement scab workers in to do your job, we don't need you. So the union that they ended up going with was COPE, which is office workers union. It's sort of strange that the airport workers chose them, but that's what they did. And initially they sort of ran a very traditional campaign, standing outside the gates of the airport with signs and, on the sidewalk, not impeding traffic or anything, just sort of flyering. So the IWW got involved soon after, I guess, with our Solidarity Committee. We have a flying squad that goes around to support other unions in the city with things like pickets and that. And we were able to create a pretty interesting relationship, eventually foster a pretty interesting relationship with those workers of sort of pushing a much more militant approach to their strike than COPE originally sort of had in mind. So we were able to sort of talk to those workers and point out, what we saw as maybe a weakness or flaw in the traditional approach of actually achieving their goal of union recognition and eventually negotiating a contract. So I think Sean will maybe go into the specifics of how that went down, and maybe I can jump back in the questions. But yeah, I was actually expecting Sean to go first, and then I could sort of piggyback off him. So I don't know what I should.
You can share.
Yeah. So maybe I'll hand it over